there is such a close monitoring of the American citizenry by the security and police forces. They can arrest anybody. There's your answer. Every adult American is a felon in one way or another. So now that we know that, and we build in the controls to monitor everyone, then we can decide whose felonies are we willing to blink and let go by, and whose felonies become a pretext to eliminate certain classes and people who make us uncomfortable, who we don't like, who we don't want to live with. Says the exquisite way we can eliminate anybody.
America.
Unmuted.
The America Unmuted Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the America Unmuted Podcast, a podcast where we interview those involved with, affected by, or passionate about the incarceration in America, and fostering conversations to inform and create positive change on recidivism. My name is Silas Dean, founder of the Resource Project, connecting incarcerated individuals to job opportunities and resources across the country, and I'm joined every week with my co-host Bernard Salandi, the former jailer of some of the largest jails in the country. This week's guest is Andrew Skotnicki. Professor Skotnicki teaches theological and criminological ethics at Manhattan College in New York City. He has spent decades working in various service capacities in America's jails, and for the past 10 years he has worked via partnership with the Dept of Corrections. There he teaches an accredited course to confined men and women in conjunction with a group of students from the main campus. The incarcerated students who complete this course are given an admission letter to attend Manhattan College upon their release. To date, approximately 65 men and women have taken tuition-free classes at Manhattan College. He is a prolific author at the intersection of theology and criminal justice. His last book, Conversion and Rehabilitation of the Penal System, a theological rereading of criminal justice, received the 2019 Aldersgate Prize. And his new book, Unjust and the Prophecy of Mass Incarceration, The Politics of Sanity, will be released this summer. Thank you for listening, and please remember to like and subscribe to this video. Everything that you do helps us continue to have interesting conversations with people who have been through the system and who are trying to make a difference. Thanks for everything, and let's get on with the episode.
So here we are, almost 30 years later. Best thing we ever did. We have two daughters that were born here. They're doing great. One is in law school. One is she's in her undergrad in Florida. So we just been a great thing. My career down here, started as soon as I came down and just ended 3 years ago when I got with a company. And then, and then Sai's father's actually was the CEO of the company until we got acquired by a bigger company. But Sai came on, going on 2 years now, and he's had such great insight on this space that, it's just a breath of fresh air. And, and he came up with this podcast out there. And it's really, I don't talk too much to him about it, but it's been really a healing thing for me because I'm getting to talk to people in the field, and it's touching on some things that, when he sent me the little 18-minute video of you, and I was just shaking my head the whole time, like, man, this dude, he gets it. Because, the whole time you talked about living in those different boroughs outside, because, we call Manhattan the city. Yeah. And I remember watching TV shows and movies now, and I told my wife, I said, all the time I lived there, the 20-something years, I never went to a rooftop party in Manhattan. That wasn't my lifestyle. I was Brooklyn with the West Indians, the basement parties, those kind of things. But I'm like, I didn't know that lifestyle. So it was interesting that you said that in that piece. So, anyway, that's my story. We want to hear your story.
Yeah, a good percentage of our guys come from Brooklyn. In fact, the fascinating thing is it's who we arrest and the localization of the geography of it. I mean, I tell my students we're in zip code 10471. Now, the Bronx is the poorest county in the country.
Oh, big time.
By far. But the funny, our college is at the edge of maybe the wealthiest neighborhood in New York City.
Yep.
And
beautiful up there.
And 10471 is zip code, and I tell my students, and I forget what year I did a study of precincts and zip codes in New York, and in the entire year, like 70 people were arrested in our zip code. And I'm sure it was mainly drunken college students
70.
trashing cars or whatever,
That's unheard of in New York.
But look at this. But look at this, Bernard. Just one of the zip codes in Brownsville, Brooklyn, 1,350 in 1 year.
Oh, yes.
And so that's why I try to tell the students, it isn't the crime, it's the color of your skin, how much money you got in your pocket, and what neighborhood you lived in. If they policed Vanderbilt just as seriously as they do poor neighborhoods in Nashville, they'd find more drug offenders there than they'd find in the ghetto.
Attest for that. It is shocking how many drugs are.
All due respects to the mighty Commodores.
Yeah, but he's right. You are absolutely
but anyway, but it's always an eye opener to students. So they actually think the people in jail are there because they're criminals. Now, we're all criminals. But the point is this is just a surreptitious way to victimize and continually to marginalize and isolate our poorest citizens. That's criminal justice in America.
Yeah. Yeah. And that song you were singing, what was that? It's just as far from the from an uptown apartment to a night on the A train. It's not that far.
It ain't far, buddy.
Not at all.
And I tell you, you ride the A train at 2 a.m, buddy, you're in a homeless shelter.
Yeah, I didn't do it. I'll tell you that.
Oh God, I got a lot of my students do. That's why we can't keep them. How you gonna expect the kid to do a term paper in microbiology when he's sleeping on the 6 train? But that's what we do. We bend over backwards to help the people who are already blessed and already materially comfortable. Yeah. And we continue to inflict misery on our poorest citizens. I tell you, even at my age, boy, my temperature just goes up sometimes. I ruined an entire conference in Seattle a couple of months ago because it was all lawyers telling me all the good work that they do. I almost flew out of my chair.
You was like doing it for whom?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you're a nice person, but don't even try to tell me that this is a just system. Don't even try. Don't even mention equal justice to me.
Justice is not blind.
I'm going to put a muzzle in your mouth. I don't even want to hear it.
New York has got to be very different than Nashville. Y'all are way more familiar with that than I am, but I know Bernard has told me a lot about the New York system and how different Nashville is, and some of the seated racism in the South is obviously, sometimes more exposed because it's talked about a lot more of the past, but it's also a lot of hidden stuff still going on. Can you talk, like you mentioned before about the racism in terms of what you've seen in incarceration up in New York? Can you talk about the justice system in terms of race at all there?
Oh yeah, it's easy to talk about. I mean, here's the curious thing, but back in the 90s, I mean, New York was a pretty ruthless town. For the last 20 years, New York has been the safest big city in the United States.
Right. Post 9/11, I agree. Yes. I
mean, we have murders. I'm sure Nashville comparably has more murders than New York, but that's all changed since COVID. There's been a crime epidemic across the country just out of desperation. And I'm sure Nashville's crime rate has probably gone up as well.
Yes, it has.
One thing is for sure, besides just the answer to your question, the demographics of New York City are Blacks and Hispanics probably make up about 1/3 of the city. They make up over 90% of the jail population.
Andrew, that's one of the things
that's all you need to know.
I walked in, like I said, when I first started doing the job, late 80s, started 87. And I look around and I'm going, wow. And I'll never forget the first time I saw a white guy in there and I said, come here, dude. Are you okay? Where's your family? He goes, why are you here? I said, look around you. I mean, you stick out like a sore. He was because that downtown jail during that era, because of the spike. Remember, that was the time in New York City we were holding like over 25,000 inmates a day in the New York City system.
That's right.
In Brooklyn House, we were carrying about 800, 900 daily. And this is no exaggeration. I probably had, out of that, probably 8 or 9 white inmates.
Yeah.
So you heard that, what I just said?
That's
Yes.
crazy. Out of how many?
Out of 900.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it
like,
was. It was either black or Hispanic.
Was the
Period.
reason those 9 were arrested was the crime just like so egregious they didn't like? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that happens?
Well, Andrew just hit it on the head. They targeted certain neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So they weren't going into Bensonhurst. They weren't going into
Park Slope,
Park Slope,
Brooklyn Heights.
They weren't going to Toad
You're
Hill,
going to see
Staten
a cop
Island.
car there.
No, exactly. But they were all in Brownsville. He gets it. East Flatbush, all that. They were,
East New York.
East New York. Forget about it. I mean, when you said that story in the thing, it brought back a memory of, and they did a documentary. Remember the documentary they did, Showtime did on the dirty officer from the 77th precinct?
Yeah.
Remember he was living in Long Island, had boats and cars and all this stuff. Well, if you saw the doc, the guy that won he was a Hispanic individual that robbed that Dominican drug lord. And remember the drug lord was bragging about how they killed him. He was one of my inmates. He was one of those kids that we liked. And I'll never forget to this day, it was 30 years ago, one of my fellow officers went to that guy's funeral. He said, man, they massacred that kid. They shot him like 100 times. And I'm like, and I like the kid, but I told him, I remember because he's coming in and out of Brooklyn now, I said, look, man, you need to stop, because I heard in the street they're saying that you robbing drug dealers. And he goes, man, I know what I'm doing. I said, you're not going to end up well. And it was sad the day we got the news that they slaughtered that kid. And then I saw this documentary, 20-some years later, and I told my wife, I said, that dude was one of my enemies. That dude was a likable character, and they telling the story like, oh, he was a piece of crap. No, he wasn't. The kid was a victim of his environment, But you're right though. You're nailing it on the head, man. It's the separate communities that represent what you see, the demographic in the jails. It's sad, but it's a reality in New York.
Yeah, and everywhere else too. I don't think we're unique.
Yeah,
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. When I first started working here, Andrew, it blew my mind when I saw so many white guys in jail. I'm going, what's happening down here? But then I had to learn the demographic. Well, really, it's the flow of how it's supposed to be, because minorities it's like my community is only like 17%. So, but now and that really hasn't really grown it. It's probably maybe 2% higher, but yet they still make up, 70% of the facility. And I'm like, that number isn't balanced, not even close. It should really be the other way around if you really want to talk about incarceration and why you're incarcerated. So, but I want to hear your perspective on that. Like, why, San, I talk about, why are we so in love with incarceration? I want to hear your perspective.
We've already started recording, by the way. I'm just going to do the intro after. Just I'll do it post, so you can just go ahead and start talking. We'll just jump into it.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the short answer, Renard, is racism. The long answer is racism. It's American apartheid. It's one thing we can be sure of, Renard, and I'm saying this as a brother. You're never going to be walking in white neighborhoods, no matter what happens. I mean, you may, you know what I'm trying to say, if you're of a certain economic class. Right. You remember Du Bois talked about the talented 10th?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote that 120 years ago.
Yeah.
He said, even in 1900, he said 10% of Black people are going to get that off. They're going to allay our guilty conscience, and we're going to pour rewards on them. And the more they're like us, the better. The more they adopt our lifestyle, our values, the more they represent the cultural codes that we find meaningful, the more we're willing to walk on them, but no more than 10%. He said 120 years ago.
Wow.
And you look at the demographics of the Black community and poor communities of color generally, whether they be from West Africa, West Indies, Native African Americans, not to mention the host of various representatives of the Hispanic community and other minority populations, such as Native Americans, the mentally ill. And you look at this whole, thing now, and you begin to see that as a society, white society will never allow people of color, just as people of color, to live with them. That's been America's story since the beginning. That's embedded in the national soul, Silas. The thing is I see people your age, and of course I've been teaching for 30 years, and I'm not trying to tell anybody anything. I ask them. I said, do you think